Hey, everybody, this is Joe Turner of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. And before I jump into part two of my interview series with Sam Toles of Civi Social, where we're discussing social media and local government, I wanted to make two quick announcements. First, Port Huron, Michigan manager James Freed has invited me to join him on Mackinac Island at the Michigan Municipal League Conference coming up in a couple weeks here in September. I guess we're going to be hanging out at Pink Pony. It's one of the most well-known bars on the island and what have you. So if you are interested in hanging out with James Freed and I think we might have some conversations about economic mobility and solar energy and some other stuff. Maybe we'll talk about the ICMA lawsuit. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about his Supreme Court case. I don't know. But if you want to hang out with us and you want to get to know James, and you want to get to know me, stay tuned for more information about that. So if you're going to the Michigan Municipal League Conference, please get in touch with me and let me know so we can arrange a meetup. The second announcement is that Sam Toles of Civi Social is going to give listeners of this podcast a 10% discount on his services if you want to take him up on his offer, his boot camp training. There's a couple caveats to that. The 10% discount only applies if you book his services between now and the end of the year, so you have until the end of the year to do it. Just say you heard about him on the City Manager Unfiltered podcast to get that 10% discount. And then the second thing is that the 10% discount only applies to the program portion of his training, not his separate cost for his travel. So just make sure we're on the same page there. The 10% discount's only for his actual services that he renders on site and not covering the travel expenses for him to get there. Okay? So I got really good feedback on part one. People really enjoyed that episode. He's gotten really good feedback from the people who've been following him and listening to the episode. So I know there's a lot of interest out there in what he's doing, and I really think he's offering great value. So again, if you want to take him up on his services, if you want to hire him to help elevate and step your local government social media game up, and you want to take advantage of the 10% discount, let him know you heard about it on the City Manager Unfiltered podcast when you make your order, when you book the services, okay? And on that note, here is part two of my interview with Sam Toles of Civi Social. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America, and we're going to jump right into part two of our interview series with Sam Toles. He's the founder and CEO of Civi Social, and in our first episode, he dropped a lot of knowledge about social media and how local governments can more effectively use it. He basically believes that most local governments are using it incorrectly or doing it wrong. He's in the business now after leaving some high-profile positions in the entertainment industry, some big responsibilities. He's jumped into the public sector with his company called Civi Social, and a lot of this is informed by his previous experience as an elected official. And, Sam, why don't you take an opportunity again to just sort of reiterate to the audience, if they're just jumping into this episode for the first time and they didn't catch the first episode, the first part of the episode series, why don't you briefly explain once again what you're doing at Civi Social and why you got into this space?
Yeah, of course. No, I'm really glad to be here again. Civi Social is something of a passion project for me. As Joe mentioned, I've had an incredible career being chief content officer at Bleacher Report, running digital for MGM Studios, running the Vimeo platform, among other things, and working with the crew at Mr. Beast to launch a new kids channel. But I was also, before all that, an elected official in a town that had, 55,000 residents, and really understood that I could put my skills, my vast knowledge and expertise in social media to a place that desperately needs it, which is small to medium-sized cities and counties. And that's why Civi Social exists, here to create a strategic roadmap for social media, identify the people in the existing city staff. So no new hiring, no expensive marketing agencies. We look at your staff, we find those hidden superstars. We then give them the training to be awesome at social media. We do this in an 8-day in-person, hands-on program in your city. So it's like consultation and training. And at the end, you'll have all the tools that you need with no expensive ongoing service requirements to be awesome at social media. And that's Civi Social. Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna throw you a little bit of a curveball here, Sam, because you had some elected official experience. And I'm curious, do you have any crazy or wild stories that you feel comfortable sharing with the group? I didn't ask you in the first episode even what city you were an elected
Yeah.
official in. I wasn't sure
Yeah.
if you even wanted to share that or
No,
not, but
I'm happy to share that I was a
we
city.
just said it was crazy California. We just told you it
It
was
was
crazy
California.
California. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I was elected to the city council in Cathedral City, California in 2010. I actually ran against two long-term incumbents that had, I think one had 3 terms and one had 2 terms, and a crazy keyboard warrior in the early days of social media. And there was me. And I unseated one of the incumbents, the other one won, and joined a council that was extremely fracas. We had two, I would say, before MAGA was a thing, we had two MAGA, and before AOC was a thing, we had two AOC, and then there was me, and I'm a pretty centrist dude. I right in the middle. I think they're both a little nuts, to be honest. Not to offend anybody on either side. I probably just lost half my clients because they're like, well, forget Sam. But no, I'm a pretty, I'm a pretty rational guy. So sometimes I'd vote with two of them, and sometimes I'd vote with the other two. But in a dynamic, and I'm sure many of your listeners experience this, when you have factions in the council, like two of those people hated the other two, right? They both hated one another. They would not speak. I mean, and,
That's
and I,
crazy. It's
I
sad
was
too, but
very sad and very, very frustrating. I think they probably hated me more than they hated each other, but they had to be nice to me because that I was would carry the vote on, whatever the issue that they wanted to pass on was. And I find it's the work is so important. The work that electeds do is so important, and it's too important for politics, especially at the local level. Like I remember waking up the day after my election and walking my neighborhood. I just needed to take a walk. And I was overwhelmed by this sense of responsibility. I'm like, the people in this city, in my community, in this neighborhood have basically given me the trust to carry their best interests forward. And that's when I went into it. And it was sad because a lot of folks that I've met in elected positions, it's all about them, their ego, their feuds with other folks. And, I hope for the benefit of our country that we can get back to a place of public service for the sake of serving people as opposed to serving self.
man, that's I wasn't expecting you to go there, and you're hitting me with that statement. Basically, 30 days after launching, literally 30 days today, as of the state of this recording of when I launched AAME, the American Association of Municipal Executives, and I feel that gravity, that sense of obligation or responsibility to carry the banner because so many people have signed. We had over 400 people sign up in our launch to become founding members of the AAME, and it means a lot to me. It's very sobering and it's very humbling to know that so many people have placed their trust and faith and confidence in me to help carry the banner for them on this vision, this mission that we have for the American Association of Municipal Executives, where we're going to be standing up and advocating on behalf and for city managers and other public sector executives. So, man, thank you for that. I wasn't expecting you to go there. Got a little serious with me on that
All right.
one, and
Look, it would have been much easier for me to take a recruiter call and do another big job than it is to build a business from the ground up that is focused. And of course, part of our strategy is the way we've priced it. And it's basically, and you'll appreciate this, your audience will appreciate this. I priced it deliberately so that the vast majority of city managers don't have to go to the electeds for approval. Like I
yeah,
know that's an issue. So
right,
like
right, yeah.
having a program that they can approve within their existing training budgets or whatever allocation that council's made without having to make me and social media and all of the stuff around that an issue. I'll price it this way because I genuinely believe that the work that cities do is important and the public trust and reestablishing that trust in that work is so critical that like it's more than money for me.
Yeah, and you know what? And what I love about this conversation that you and I are having, Sam, is that as I alluded to in the very first episode, and I'll repeat here again, this is not a paid advertorial on the part of Sam Tools and Civic Social. We had an organic conversation on LinkedIn. It led to a phone call, and I didn't even know exactly what your product was or offerings were. I didn't even look at your website. I hadn't had time to even look at what you're doing because I'm busy with my own stuff right now. But I knew you had some great thoughts and wisdom and experience when it came to social media that I could give value to my audience, right? Because at the end of the day, as a podcaster, I need to provide value in some form, entertainment, education, value to my audience. Otherwise, they're not going to listen. It's about my audience, not about me. It's not about you. It's about them. And that's why I didn't really even care what your product was per se, because I just knew that you had value to add to this conversation.
I appreciate that, though. It's good. It's good. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's been an incredible chat with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation.
I gotta tell you, man, I don't know what it is. I don't know when the clock turned in this country, Sam, but it's like, from 1 year to 1 year, it went from, okay, everything's now got to be subscription based. You got to have an annual retainer.
Yep.
You got to have a monthly subscription. It's like we're so shackled and bound to all these different obligations, car payments, a Netflix subscription, all this stuff that happens. So for you to come out and have this program where you're creating this mastermind tutorial type system to teach people how to fish and do it on themselves. Like, you're like, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to parachute in for the week or whatever, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys and I'm gone. I'm out. You're not on the hook to me anything in the future.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why I'm really excited about having this conversation with you, Sam, is because I am right of center politically, and I have been one of those guys that has bitched and moaned and lamented sort of the waste of resources spent by local governments on PIO efforts that I feel like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I've criticized again, I hate to sound like a broken record. I'm, always trying to go after the ICMA. I'm not, but the ICMA is an organization with a $35 million budget. They have 60,000 followers on LinkedIn, and I look at their content and I say, how come they only get one or two reactions? They might get a handful of reactions. They barely ever get double digit reactions. They hardly ever get any comments. And it's like, there's no way in hell, if I was running my own business, my own private business, and I was spending money on a comms team or whatever it was, and I'm saying I'm paying for this. This is the result I'm getting for my money that I'm investing into this business, or the shareholders. The shareholders would never tolerate that.
Yeah.
And so I come at this from a somewhat skeptical, frustrated sort of observer of poor PIO work in the public sector. And I say, are these make work jobs so people can be surfing the internet all day and on social media? Because what value are they producing, right? And one thing that I really love about this conversation we're having is that you're giving real world actionable guidance in these podcast episodes of how to make a difference in these communities today. And then you also have a program in place where you can help people through a more substantive training program. But that's why I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, no, look, I think in the experience that I've had, and it's limited because the business is relatively new, but the folks that have been placed into these communications roles, a lot of the times they're being pulled out of other departments. Like it's an afterthought in a
Right.
lot of instances, right? Like, oh, you were in events, you must know something about communications. Now, I'm blessed, and I'm actually I can proudly say that, and I was shocked. By the way, I called Cathedral City. I knew the city manager because I hired him, and I genuinely believe this when I told him, I'm like, the best decision I ever made as a city council member in my 4 years was selecting you. And it was not easy for me to, convince my colleagues who all had their own horse in the race, but Charlie blew me away and he was amazing. And so, in the early days when I was formulating Civi Social, I gave him a call. I said, I'd love to tell you about this, but I don't want to sell it to you because like I feel as a former elected in your town and somebody who hired you, like I just spread the word, like tell others,
Yeah.
tell Palm Desert, tell Palm Springs. And Charlie's like, great, sure. I'll talk to you. And he brought in his manager of communications, who's this super sharp guy. And the manager of communications literally turned to Charlie and said, we have to have this. And Charlie's like, okay, Sam, are you comfortable? And I'm like, yeah, if you want to be, I don't know. But the reason I tell that story is working with him in comparison to some of the clients that I've worked with is really, it lets you know, like having somebody who's got a head start is worth the investment. Like just picking someone, just like the same, a lot of cities will be like, oh, we'll just get some young person to do social media.
Because they're
That's
young, right?
like, they're
Yeah.
young. They must
Yeah.
know about social media. That's not a strategy, right? You want to have somebody who not only has some experience in understanding communication, but that's hungry and passionate about effectively telling the city's story, not just sort of like holding the seat. And unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, both public and private, there are managers and people that just want to hold the seat. So having somebody
Yeah.
who's ambitious and thoughtful and wanting to make impact, but also has at least some amount of experience and understanding of social can really accelerate what you're doing. But again, I've worked with people that have no experience and have had to, teach them like this is what Chat GPT is. Like it's a good tool. You should know it and it's helpful in some of the things that you're doing. Right. Like, but if they're eager and they're willing and they have passion for it, I think it can be super, that role is critical.
Well, I think also what's important to understand, and I think we all kind of know this, but we don't really consciously or aware of or think about it. But when you look at the evolution of this space, these positions, it's all a relatively new phenomenon, obviously, with social media, right? And so many local governments don't have the resources or didn't have the resources to ever sort of dedicate somebody 100% to communications. This
Yep.
has been, yeah, and then the rise of social media almost beget sort of like fostered its own snowball effect where it created the need for more PIOs because you have the social media aspect of like all this constant information going in and out. And so what happens is you have a lot of communities, especially small communities out there who, like you said, they're pulling in somebody who's traditionally not a communications person because they need somebody to do it, and they don't have the ability or means to hire a full-time person to just do social media. Like that's just not cost efficient or effective for an organization. And so you have a lot of folks who just aren't experienced or have the skill set to do the job. And what again, and I'm not even trying to sell your program. I've never sat in it or not, but what I find amazing about this whole idea is that for I'm sure, a relatively small investment, you can bring in an expert such as yourself to train these folks because it's really unfair to them when you think about it, right? You're bringing in these people who have never done the job or don't really know it very well, or it's like not a primary function, and then you're saying, "Hey, go do our social media strategy or communication strategy."
Yeah.
And so I think it's something to be said for, "Hey, let's give the people the tools they need to be successful, right? Let's set them up to be successful."
And I would say this, Joe, like that is one of the things that fills my heart. Like I've loved working with the communications manager in Cathedral City. Like we just have so much fun. He was a big fan of Bleacher Report and wanted to know every tip and trick. And he's like soaking it like a sponge. And I know he's gonna jumpstart that city in an incredible way. But it's almost more fulfilling to me to work with somebody who is getting the information for the first time, watching them, jot down on a notepad. And I have to keep reminding him like, everything is I will deliver you a finished product with links to everything. You don't need to actually write any of this down because we take care of all that for you. But watching them like realize that there are tools and they can do this, like it's exciting to see that transformation in someone. And, because of the elected officials in a number of places, I've worked with communities that have had toxic situations where the electeds have been nasty to staff members for being on social media, and that fear turning into empowerment is just one of those things that I'm so thrilled and delighted to be a part of it. It makes the job worth doing.
So I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this, and I don't know if it's relevant to you or not, or for the topic of this conversation. But you mentioned in the first episode and just a little bit ago that you were involved in a city manager recruitment. You might have been involved in two recruitments. I'm not sure during your time on
I
the.
was too.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm not sure if there's anything you want to talk about, maybe tangentially about that, since this is a city manager themed show and you're an elected official, and maybe that's a standalone episode to have
Yeah.
you come back
No.
another day.
No. Let's do it. Let's
But
dive in.
one also, okay. So what was that experience like for you? And I'm also wondering too, in the context of social media, did that have any impact on that? Because we're going back to around 2010, 11, 12, where obviously social media existed, but it
Yeah.
wasn't the same as it is
Yeah.
today.
I mean, in 2010, social was not a factor in hiring that individual. It was still relatively new. I mean, it was only a few years old, and it was. But I will tell you, thinking about selfishly for city managers and selfishly for electeds. Look, in any business, in anything in life, one of my best friends in the world gave me this advice, and I use it as gospel. And by the way, I think city managers, at least the ones I've worked with, both the ones I've hired and the ones I've interfaced with in Civi Social, have embodied this. Like incentive dictates behavior. if you understand someone's incentive, you can actually manipulate or dictate the behavior the path that they choose. And city
Right.
managers have to do this at like on a high wire, juggling balls and, and probably, I don't know what else, but like, maybe blowing bubbles. I mean, you have to understand the motivations. And again, in politics, in corporate, it's pretty simple, like increasing the bottom line, cutting costs. Like that's generally 99% of the incentives. And it's fairly easy to align with that. You're dealing with personalities. You got on one side of the equation, you have an HOA person who's very particular about a color of paint, and she ran for council, and that's her sort of shtick. And then the other side, you got sort of like an old school Democratic poll who's all about DEI and sort of the latest woke issues. And like those people are not going to be aligned, and you have to find a way to, knowing what the needs of the city, the community, and how to move those forward. You have to bring those two misaligned incentives and find a way to weave them together and get them to that place. But what I was going to say, selfishly, the incentive for city electeds as well as city managers is, so great social media benefits you both, right? For an elected, if
True.
people feel great about the direction of their city because the social media is doing that work, they're going to get reelected. That's a no-brainer, right? Like if people are saying, "Oh my God, I see the work of the city. I love the Instagram feed. I go on YouTube and get all these how-to tricks. I'm in love with my city." That's going to convey to the people who are running the city. That's going to help the electeds in their reelection far more than the negative people that are bashing them on Nextdoor and Facebook and their responsive or non-responsive social media of today. But for city managers, and I think you brought this up, it's a super interesting point I hadn't contemplated. That portfolio of work becomes like a calling card. You can say, hey, here's my resume and here's the Instagram, like listing Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, like here's our city socials. Check out what we're doing. We talked about in the last episode, like the power of story and how that breaks through the noise and creates a deeper connection. It's true in hiring. If somebody's like,
Well, it's sorry to interrupt you here too, but that's what your resume is too. You should be telling a story on your resume as a city manager candidate or whatnot, because you want to tell this, and you should be telling the story that you want to tell based off the specific position that you're applying for, right? If a city is looking for somebody who's going to be really innovative and creative, then that's tell that story. If they're looking for somebody who's going to be really budget conscious and fiscally conservative or financially minded, you want to tell that story.
Exactly right. And by the way, you can even carefully select you can create an additional social media account and basically aggregate all the content that tells that story. It's like, here is, city manager so-and-so's Instagram, and you happen to have selected the narrative pieces that are perfectly positioned for your target. Say, like, here, check out this Instagram. Now you've got like a portfolio, a library of content that tells that narrative, doesn't just look like words on a piece of paper, but actually takes the next step. And look, I've hired a lot of people at the highest levels in corporate, and I've also hired city managers, which is the equivalent to hiring somebody at the highest level of corporate. Anyone who goes the extra mile to impress and has something to show me, not tell me, instantly stands out. Instantly stands out.
Good advice. Good advice for all the executives listening, right? Because you have sat in that chair as an elected official looking for a CEO to run your municipal corporation. So
100%. I'll do a tip, something that I don't tell many people, but I'm going to give it to my friends in city government. So when I have a resume, I obviously do the standard thing, but I also created a sizzle reel because I'm a content guy. I basically had people that I've worked with over the course of my career tell their perspective of my story. I had videos of each of those folks, and cut it together in what I call it my testimonial reel. And so anytime I have an interview, I send my thank you letter and I link to that video. It's a surefire. I'm so surprised no one else has picked up this trick. And if this is a media podcast, I might not share that because one day I may go back into media. But like, it is so powerful because people are seeing other people telling the stories
the social proof, right?
Social proof,
Yes.
100%. It's very powerful. I highly recommend it. I've had a couple dear close friends of mine. I've shared this trick, and it's gotten them hired at places like Facebook. It's a winner.
So if you're a city manager listening to this podcast, you would tell them, hey, go around, put a sizzle reel together,
Yeah.
and meaning you would go and ask people who can vouch for you and talk
Yep.
about you in a very glowing way, right?
That's right.
To basically give a short video testimonial, compile that together, put that on a clip, and then use that is in your process
Correct.
of displaying your ability, showing,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And do you have a recommendation on how long that should be?
Mine is 7 minutes long because it's a professional. I mean, it could be shorter, but I'm like, if they've taken the time to interview you and are considering you, like if you're sending a thank you note and they're like, this is somebody I'm thinking about, they're going to take 5 to 7 minutes to watch a video. And like, I would mix electeds, department heads. If you manage several cities, having a mixture of electeds. If your sort of reputation or your narrative is fiscal conservative, like give them prompts like tell us about the time, tell me about the time you cut the budget or we had to work on this complicated budget thing or save this amount of money. Like tell a story, use that narrative, those people talking about you to tell the story you want to tell by prompting them with the right questions.
That's an amazing tip there, Sam, with the sizzle reel. I'm not in a position right now where I need to do that, but I'm gonna definitely file that away, and I might actually utilize that someday. But like I said earlier, I'm really excited to see if someone listening to this podcast decides to do that. And I would even encourage those who are aspiring to be city managers or assistants. Hey, put your own sizzle reel together and give that to the city manager if you're trying to get promoted or trying to get a position someplace. That could be a very interesting tool, and I would really like to get some feedback on that. So, on that note, Sam, is there anything we left out of the conversation with respect to any nuggets of information when it came to your time selecting city managers
Yeah.
for the role?
Yeah, look, I mean, it was interesting because some of the council were very set on getting someone from California. Like they felt that someone coming from outside the state would not be as capable or knowledgeable on the specificity of California law. And as you know, California is very, very voluminous in its legal
Yes.
ease.
We have a
That
full-time state legislature, and our elected officials like to work overtime. Let's just put it that way.
They do indeed. That was not my consideration. As I mentioned, I was the swing vote, so I carried the day. We ended up hiring Charlie from Avalon, Arizona, and I was just deeply impressed by his humility. First and foremost, he didn't come in as somebody who was like braggadocious or overly pitchy. He was very humble and he was very specific about the challenges that he faced, why those challenges were akin to the challenges that we had expressed as concerns for us and things that we needed to address, how he addressed them. And he consistently went back and gave credit to staff, which is something I value a lot. As I said in our earlier episode, my success at Bleacher Report was all about the work of my staff. And great city managers have the humility, in my opinion, and what won me over with Charlie was his humility and his willingness to empower and really support the staff that worked with him and showcase how their work under his guidance achieved great things that were relevant to what we were looking for. So that's how we did it.
Awesome. So, Sam, during your comments there, when you're talking about the process of hiring a city manager, a thought occurred to me. And you're not exactly a PR sort of crisis management guy, but you are a social media guy, and you're adept with media, and you were an elected official. I'm curious, how would you handle, or how would you guide or advise city manager candidates to handle or put out negative information they might have in their background when they're trying to compete for position, because in this day and age too, with the way, I mean, the crazy part with social media now is almost anybody has some baggage with the way things get kind of spun out of control unfairly or fairly, depending on the circumstance or the situation. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as just the general age of 2024 social media,
Yeah.
our online reputation and branding? And
Yeah.
city managers have these roles where, depending on the area that you're going to, they can count on local gadflies or bloggers or whatnot that are going to drum it up and and pick it out and try to spotlight it and smear them. I'm just kind of curious how you think they should approach it when interacting with a governing body who's looking at whether or not they should hire them and they have these questions in their background.
Well, I think that the most important thing, again, we've spent a lot of time talking about story, but I think that in this instance, it's almost essential and critical, is to create a narrative that tells your story and to get that out there up front. Now, I'm assuming most of these roles are coming through recruiters.
Right.
So the person that you're going to convey this narrative to is going to be initially the recruiter and eventually to the council if they select you for interview. But obviously, you want to talk about the things that you do, all like just like you would pitch yourself, like your sales reel, your testimonial. Like you're going to sell yourself. I'm the best person for this job. I see your challenges and opportunities. I've done this kind of thing. You're struggling with this. I can help you with this. I've done X, Y, and Z. All of that. Sell, 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 as everybody should in any interview. If you felt the interview has gone well and you feel like, oh, I think they're seriously considering me as a candidate, towards the end of the interview, you're going to say, I want you to be aware because I believe in transparency. We are in government, we're in a fishbowl, we all appreciate that there's this issue. This is why it happened. There was some negative press, but you're going to have to create the story as to like why it happened, why it was unfair, or, why it was overblown, or whatever the narrative was. I had a crazy keyboard warrior who had a vendetta against me because I parked in his parking space, whoever knows. But like, come up with something that is compelling and creates empathy, right?
But you're right. Tell the story, right? You got
But
to tell the
but
story.
but tell the story. Just like I said in the last time, as it was with with social media, you got to say the good and the bad. You got to own that authenticity. It's the same thing in an interview because we are in such a completely open communication society that if you don't do it, and in cities, we had rumors and gossip mills. The people that were sort of paying close attention to government knew kind of who we were hiring as the city manager, not because I said anything, because I valued that confidentiality, but because one of the council members who was unhappy with the selection started seeding that out, and that happens. So
Yeah. Yeah.
get ahead of it, because the last thing you want to do is be like,
That
yeah,
happened in San Bernardino just a few months back. I
yeah,
don't know if you pay attention to San Bernardino or not, but yeah,
I
that happened
didn't
there.
see it. No, I mean, but like, get ahead of it, because if you don't, the negative is gonna get out there, and you're not gonna be able to control the story of the narrative. Tell the story the way you want to. And by the way, if they love you and that story does get out because one of the council members does break protocol, now the other council that is firmly behind you is like, yeah, but this is the actual story. We're hiring this guy. We know what happened. This is ridiculous. This is council member so and so raising BS again, and the electeds can come to your aid. But don't surprise. Look, this is the like no brainer, nothing stupidest comment ever, but surprising electeds is not in your best interest. I can say that as an elected. I can say that as an executive. Like, the least thing I wanted was surprise. I never minded failure. In fact, my number one KPI in every organization I've led, I always start with my number one KPI is failure goals. People who do not fail cannot learn. People who cannot learn will not grow. And so I expect failure because growth is the most important thing, at least in the private sector. And so I never punished an executive or somebody that was working for me because they failed or screwed up. But surprises were never welcome, even if it was not, even if it was never their intent to surprise, like just never a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that kind of goes back to earlier in the conversation, the first episode when you were talking about A/B testing, and so you're sort of hardwired to appreciate and want failure because failure gets you to the next iteration of what success looks like, right? You're knocking down the doors, and so I also think that's a little bit of a different mindset from the private sector versus the public sector, and one that we need to bring more in and we need to foster more of an environment that's conducive to taking risk, right? Instead of being risk averse, but that's a conversation for another day.
I wish it was more true in the private sector than the perception of it. I think that there are, it depends.
Fair enough.
It depends on the company, but yes, I've seen both versions. Anyone who has more tolerance for innovation and trial and error, like if you do things and they go wrong, it's okay if you can, like, as long as it isn't catastrophic, you're going to learn something and you're going to be better for it. Like that's just a mentality that, I think is so valuable. I'll get off the soapbox, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say that not only do city managers need to have governing body elected officials who are willing to tolerate certain degrees of risk, but city managers themselves need to also have the ability to tolerate risk and allow their subordinates to engage in stuff that might fail. And this kind of gets back to the first part of the conversation where we talked about putting guardrails around the social media and understanding that things could happen and what have you. But Sam, one of the things that we talked about also in the first episode, I'm not sure if I gave you the opportunity to really kind of hammer it home, and I wasn't sure if you wanted to expand on this a little bit more before we segue into the elected official part that I really want to get into here is, you working on as an elected official and seeing contracts and vendors and RFPs, and now you're obviously at Civi Social. You see organizations that are hiring these high price consultants or communications firms. Did you get a chance to really communicate what your thoughts are and why you think those are not good options
Oh
for local
God.
governments?
You're gonna have to you'll have to edit this one down. No, I'll try to be concise. Look, I'm going to raise my hand, right? Failure goals, I preach them. I learned the lesson of this because I was a young council member. I was in my early 30s when I got elected, and I knew that the city needed help desperately needed help with marketing. And so it was a campaign pledge, and I wanted to do it, and we immediately dove in. The city manager knew it was a priority. He brought a number of firms. Some of my council members wanted local firms. I'm like, I want a firm from Los Angeles. I want a really good firm. I know I've done marketing. I've been in marketing. I know what this looks like. And so we hired an expensive firm, and they went and they did their work, and some of the work was okay. They came up actually with a logo that the city still uses and a style guide and some necessary elements. But the core function of the work that they were hired to do, which was like the narrative and the actual marketing of Cathedral City. I was reminded of this because I, again, was talking to the city manager who was there with me. It was not Charlie, it was another city manager. My city manager tapped me on the shoulder because he looked over and saw that I was looking unhappy. And he said, "Is everything okay? You don't look happy." And I said, "I could have told a better story. We wasted a bunch of money." I felt terrible because I was the one who had spearheaded it, but I knew that this was not going to be effective. And what's interesting is the timing of this, because in the early part of my career, I was in media marketing. But since the advent of social media, marketing and how it works has completely changed. And unfortunately, the tactics of traditional marketers have not. They have not evolved. I've been, working in the social media space for a decade now, and marketers have done nothing but completely miss the very basic things like authenticity, engagement, niche, all the stuff we were talking about on the last episode. They're the ones who are going to put out those sort of templatized, like celebrating National Hot Dog Day, cookie cutter, formulaic stuff. Like every consultant, every marketer trots out the same 10-year-old playbook because it's easy and they're lazy to basically convince government that they're the experts. They've been I worked for Coca-Cola, I worked for Nike, I know this stuff. Yeah, they worked for them maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and that stuff has changed. And even when they were working for them, it wasn't right. And even if it was right, it wasn't in the context of local government because it's different. Like
Right.
it's and the other thing, and we talked about this in the beginning of this episode, and everybody's looking for that endless subscription, right? Like there's a funny term in the consulting industry called scope creep. So a consultant comes in, and I say to my consultant friends, and I have a few, I said, scope creep makes you a creep, right? Like that is absolutely like the worst thing. So these consultants, I've worked with McKinsey and others, big consultant companies, they come in specifically, the company has a goal. They want them to solve this problem. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, we've uncovered this other thing, but good news, we have people for that. And now those people have uncovered another thing, but good news, we have people. And all of a sudden this, contained specific problem has wrapped into like a multi-year consulting arrangement, and money is flying out the window and nothing's actually getting done. Like
Yeah.
the sad thing about consultants is like, the staff will still have to do the work. Like you're going to need people to implement it, which is why like consultants are only valuable in my humble opinion. And I'm self-serving here because my product is this, but like 8 days is plenty. If they can't get you a really good recommendation, some very good training, and get you on your way in under 2 weeks, they're taking you for a ride. That's
Yeah.
my opinion.
Interesting. Well, I appreciate that opinion. And I think now is probably a good time to talk about the elected official component and social media. I'm going to give you a little backstory for me. I used to be a proud social media terrorist. I was very, very
Ooh,
adept at weaponizing it.
ooh.
And, but at the same time, I'm telling you this, it's very common for me to be in conversations where I talk to elected officials and others and tell them that, you know what, Twitter's not real, or X is not real, Facebook is not real. And you might be saying, Joe, how do you juggle this juxtaposition of you saying that you are a social media terrorist or whatnot and wreaking havoc, but yet you're also saying that it's not real? And I have a really simple explanation for that, and we can unpack your experience, obviously, with elected officials and social media. But to me, what it all gets down to, the brass tacks, is, does the individual or individuals who are on social media, the keyboard warriors, are they anything more than that? Are they able to marshal troops or mobilize people into action in any way, shape, or form? Or are they just sitting there in their quote unquote mom's basement pounding away at the keyboard because they're mad at the world and they want to take their frustrations out? And that's, to me, what I mean by the dichotomy between being a true sort of social media terrorist
Mhm.
versus a keyboard warrior. And I put myself in the former, not the latter. And I'm really curious to see what your take is on social media and elected officials when it comes to the discourse, how elected officials are responding to it, how they're interacting and communicating to staff as a result of it.
Yep.
Because and I think a lot of city managers and public sector employees who are listening to this podcast are of the opinion that elected officials are way too gullible and way too easily manipulated by a few minority voices who are making waves on social media platforms.
Yeah, I completely agree and concur with your conclusion, though I will caveat it by saying, look, the vast majority, and in the cities that I deal with, so populations of anywhere from, let's call it 10,000 to 200,000, give or take, right? You're talking about 20, maybe 30 people that are constantly agitating. And what's funny is, as you go from city to city, the names change, but the stories don't. It's like, oh, there's Sally. She's complaining about this, or there's Joe. He's doing that. Like, it doesn't, like, the type of communication, what they're doing, how effective they are. And I always ask the same question. Like, when I begin an engagement with a city, I do a deep dive with either the communications person or the city manager themselves and ask the questions like, who should I be aware of on social media? Send me all the people that I should know who are boosters and who are agitators. And I'll get 5 or 6 names of each, typically. Zero following, zero engagement, just like we were talking about that, account that gets 1 or 2 likes, even though they have 60,000. Like, no one cares. But they post a lot. They're constantly, complaining about something. Now, the only time, and when I meet in these cities and deal with this, what's sad is how much time the city spends addressing these handful of people, resources. Like,
And you're
social.
talking about beyond just the simple social media. You're talking about just sort of like the general gadfly in general as well, right? I mean, you're talking just the minority few that are getting involved and expressing frustration. The staff allocation of resources is exorbitant, right?
100%, 100%. And so social media actually is something that can help prioritize, because if you have a broader engagement, this is why I always say, when you activate a new social media strategy, when you implement a new social media roadmap, look for signals from new people that are popping up in comments or liking your content, see what their sentiment is, and lean in there, because they're probably more reflective of the broader community sentiment that these sort of like people that have been hanging around for a long time and are seeking attention and affection or something from posting negativity on social media.
So, what would be your recommendation to staff or city managers or department heads or what have you when they are getting throttled by not necessarily them themselves as being personalized or personified, but the city's being criticized, the overall performance of the city is being criticized, and therefore by proxy the elected officials are being criticized, right?
Mhm.
Because if the city's not doing its job, then therefore the elected officials aren't doing their job, and if the elected officials aren't doing their job, then therefore staff must not be doing their job because they're not giving the direction, or whatever the case might be, as a trickle down effect. So how should staff handle or prep or train? Maybe this is outside of your wheelhouse, so forgive me. But
Yeah.
how should a city manager and staff handle or guide elected officials who are getting spun up on the keyboard warrior aspect of this equation?
Well, I'll tell you a couple things. First, it's interesting being somebody who is a very prominent social media executive expert. When I go into any city, I meet with the electeds, and I think it gives them comfort because A, I've been an elected, so I know what it's like, and B, I have the authority. I lean into the second as an important factor, though, because one of the things that I could never dispute is people who are knowledgeable, who are actually understand the analytics, understand how social's working, can give you data, can give you graphs, can and the people that are, if you and your staff are controlling something that's growing in a very positive way and creating a halo for your city, you have the keys to the car that they don't understand how it works. And they can't risk taking those keys away because you've created this mysterious success. But also being able to get more familiar and understand all of the sort of detailed intricacies of social media as you sort of move on that journey gives you the ability to speak authoritatively, like this person, look at the engagement of this person compared to this person. You can start using the analytics and the data to show them factually that the fear and concern that they have is unfounded or unmitigated. And of course, the other thing that is a tactic I'm sure everyone tries is like take them offline, see if you can engage them in DM, defuse them. Sometimes they will go away because they actually are just seeking information. But the ones that are constantly engaging, you're going to have to create a narrative, and that narrative should be based in data. It's like, this is our overall social. These are the this is the overwhelming sentiment of each of these social posts. This is outside of that sentiment, and using that data and being fluent in that data, having a comms team that can confidently express that information to council members gives them comfort that, oh yeah, this isn't an overwhelming issue. This is just, Anne again going off about the garbage cans.
Yeah, yeah. And I have an increasingly, growing audience of elected officials who listen to this program, and I want to speak to them a little bit because I don't think they fully understand how demoralizing it is to staff when staff has invested hundreds of hours for example, on a specific project, only to have some people who are Johnny come lately arrive at the party at the council meeting when it's going to be voted on, and they want to throw some red flags on the equation and try to gum up the works, and then the council, I got to tell the elected officials who are listening, listen, I get that you have a tough job. You represent the people. We live in a Republican democracy type deal, and I respect all that. But you're also elected to make decisions, and there's got to be a time and a place at some point where somebody's elected to say, hey, you know what? I want to take the feedback from the people, and I want to obviously take that into account, and we want to use that and to incorporate into our decision making process. But I think you also need to hold the people accountable for getting engaged in the process at the appropriate time, and don't reward bad actors who want to throw bombs and Molotov cocktails at the finish line and try to rip the rug out from underneath staff when they've invested all this time and energy to get something to the finish line. Now, if staff has engaged in a process where they've been opaque and not transparent, then I can understand some of the vitriol and the criticism and the heat that they might be, hurling that way at the elected officials. But I would like to hear elected officials say, you know what, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, this process has been going on for 6 months. This process has been going on for a year and a half. We've had these benchmarks. We've had these community gatherings, scoping sessions. We've had these community
Yep.
meetings. We've met about it here. The time for you to tell us to call off the dogs and go back to the drawing board, we're past that. We have staff. We have highly trained, competent staff that we believe in, that we have faith in, who have brought this to us, and we've gone through this process, and we are going to go forward with it. And you need to be more engaged. It's like it's like this whole notion that just because you show up to a council meeting and then you get to wave the flag that I'm a patriotic American because I'm going to attend this council meeting, that's not exactly what being participatory in the democratic process is. You know what I mean? And so I wish elected officials were more conscientious of the impact they're I'm going to say it, the impact they're weaseling out of making a decision has on staff, because there's nothing that really like takes the fire out of you than to know that you put all this work into it, and then you could have somebody who's completely uninformed, has not put in any time or effort to educate themselves about it, and then the elected officials just say, we're going to go with them over what staff has said. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not, and I'll tell you, I'm not for out of control staff. I'm not for staff that basically runs roughshod over the council and does their own thing. That's not what I'm advocating at all. But there is a process to how we operate in government. And forgive me for this rant in the soapbox for a second. We need to be more respectful of our staff. And I just wish that elected officials truly understood that while they're trying to score political points to make a good, a good face showing, right, and save face in front of the, resident who showed up to speak for 3 minutes at the council meeting during a public comment period or on that specific agenda item, that the individuals that they work with day in day out that are get the city running, it has an impact on them. And I think they should take a more measured approach in some of this social media criticism that they get, or people showing up at council meetings at the last minute.
Yeah. No,
Sorry
look.
about that. That's just a
No,
little bit of a,
no.
I was
Look,
expecting to go there, but
it's interesting that you look. I will tag on because it's been it's been a decade since I sat in the chair, and I have had the privilege of attending some council meetings, just because I always like to, when I'm working with a client, I like to get, if there is a council meeting scheduled during my engagement, I like to get a sense of the community, and I go out. My most important work is going out to the local restaurant and for brunch or breakfast, and just kind of asking people around to get a sense. And it is very, I could not, like, I spoke to a city manager I knew, and I said, I miss it, and I would never do the elected thing again, because it's so disheartening to watch a decision process that is so measured and cautious and has no teeth to it or perspective. Like, I want elected officials to be thoughtful and spend time with the material, but also make a decision. There's so much of this back and forth, and like,
right.
oh,
Or
couldn't
let's study it some more, right?
let's
Or let's
study
send it
some more,
back for,
right? Yeah,
yeah.
we are in 2024. We face a lot of challenges at local and higher levels of government. Leaders have to be decisive, and they have to be willing to say, look, I feel it in my heart. I'm like, so many people in the elected roles are more in. We went the beginning of this episode, I spoke to this, like, it was my feeling that my seat was less important than doing the right thing for my neighbors and my community. So many electeds are more interested in holding on to their seat than doing the right thing. And that, I don't know how we change that. Social media is not going to change that. But I do think, again, going back to sort of the crux of what I do in social media, I think if staff is clever and are able to, through consistency, a little bit of luck, and some great team members who are creating this content, once you've built the moat, once your social media is a strong suit, it's a tool that you have agency over and control over, because the staff are the ones who make that content. That code officer who makes the crack the code video every day, or whatever it is going to be, or the police officer who is working with kids in the community, and people love, like, her little baking video that she does talking about her work with the kids, whatever it is. Like, people begin to follow that and create the connection with that staff. It's really hard to change the dynamic of power with that staff that has such a important presence in the community. And that's why this getting social right is a way to recalibrate the power, not only away from the keyboard warriors, but in more balance between staff and electeds, that it's not reactionary. You can actually be proactive.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing, something else I wanted to talk about that I think we kind of glossed over and haven't really focused on at all is the silent majority. And a lot of times it's kind of used in a negative way to a degree. But apathy isn't always a bad thing. Okay. Like, and maybe that's not the right word, but when a community is humming along and things are going good and nobody's showing up to council meetings, that isn't necessarily a sign of disengaged, apathetic citizenry. I mean, people could be genuinely happy and content with the way the city's being ran. I think there has to be an element to this whole equation that, when you're an elected official and that you're elected by thousands of people to represent a community, that two, three, four, five people who show up on Facebook or show up at a council meeting are not necessarily representative of the people who elected you. And why are you giving an outsized voice to these people? Now, again, I think there has to be just some discernment, right? There has to be some discernment. So if you have, say, for example, a pastor who represents a large congregation,
Yeah.
I'm not saying you got to go by what that person says, but you could probably feel relatively confident that that person's representing a larger group than just him or herself, right? And I think you can try to like coalesce and figure out what's going on, but I think there's just a lot of lack of discernment when it comes to elected officials and how they process negative
Yeah.
information on social media.
Yeah.
And
This is
and
why I love.
social sorry about this.
Yeah.
I'll step on you there a little bit, but social media, if it's done appropriately by a social media terrorist like myself, it does have the ability to create this echo chamber effect that gives it this outsized perception of how big it really is, right? And
100%.
and because social media, it can spread so fast and so quick, it can literally look like it's just everywhere all at once. But to go back, and man, we've said to go back to the first episode quite a bit, but if you go back to the first episode, you talked about being ephemeral and impermanent, right? A lot of this stuff is like, a flash fire, like it burns out really quick and then it's just gone. It's like there's nothing there. And I just wish elected officials had more discernment, more understanding, and a little bit more just sort of backbone when it comes to what they're encountering in the trenches of social media.
Yeah. No, amen. I mean, it's true. That's why I like survey work. One of the things that I was doing with one of my city clients, there was a lot of impressions that there were certain things. I was asking the department heads, like, what are the concerns? What are the concerns? What are the concerns? And they listed the same 4 or 5 things. And then when I reviewed some recent survey data from the city manager, none of those things. Like 69% of the residents were thrilled. Were actually very happy with city services generally, were perfectly content. And the number one issue was like safe places to work, to work and play. That's what they wanted.
Yeah.
They weren't concerned about some code violation with garbage cans or some. It was very simple. And I think that when you think about that silent majority, I think about my city, the city of Fort Lauderdale. I want the parks to look nice. I want the beaches to be safe. I want the roads not to have potholes. I appreciate the frequency of garbage pickup. It's actually almost too much. They pick up the garbage twice a week and they do bulk every month, which is wild to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, I deeply appreciate. I think they're doing a great job, even though the electeds at times leave something to be desired. I'm deeply impressed with the work, and I think for most residents in most cities, like they're busy with their own lives. If there's something that's a problem, that's a true problem that actually means something, believe me, you'll know about it because it won't just flash up on social media. It will be a drumbeat, and the drumbeat gets louder because those problems that are actually meaningful to the silent majority don't go away.
Yeah. And as we're having this conversation, I'm sitting here thinking, and this is going to be sort of my feedback to the city managers who are listening, or to the assistant and deputy city managers who are listening to the podcast. Is you know social media can have a very damaging, cancerous effect, right? Because if left unchecked or unabated, or and I know you said you don't respond directly, but you said, hey, don't respond with comments directly, but you can respond indirectly in other ways to mitigate the damage of these cancerous sort of attacks that are happening on social media. I would remind the city managers that, hey, it's also healthy and productive for you as the leader of the organization to set the record straight with your own staff when it comes to communicating the successes and the achievements and the
Yes.
accomplishments and the
Yes.
support that you're getting, not only just from your perspective as being sort of the guiding, stable force in the organization, but also to communicate the feedback that you get from your elected officials on things that are going on. So I do think that sometimes city managers allow the social media rodeo to get a little out of control because they don't really have their hand on the wheel with respect to putting the thumb on the scale and communicating to the staff. Staff needs to be reminded at times that, hey, what you're reading on social media isn't always the truth, or isn't, might be your own little bubble. That might be your own little algorithm. That isn't necessarily reality, and you have to have something beyond just some knuckleheads who are spouting off at the mouth on social media as a justification for doing something. And I'm going a little bit of a rant here. I'm sorry.
No, go
I'm
go.
getting
I
I'm getting a little tuned up here.
love it.
Sam, you
I love it.
brought something out on me. I think I've been waiting for a long time to unpack some of the stuff because of my past experiences with it. But I got to tell you, man, the average dumbass who's on the keyboard in a community on Facebook are disproportionately low IQ people. They're low IQ losers who don't have anything going on in their life. There are some exceptions to the rule. I'm not saying they all are, but generally speaking, the people who are productive, creative, innovative thinkers, the ones that are trying to, go to work, take care of the family, pay tax, they are not on Facebook trying to figure out who the hell's jaw jacking someone over here or what the drama is over here. You're talking about low IQ people that probably don't even vote. In fact, I bet you if you could get keyboard warriors and get their voter registration data and do a cross check on it, there's a disproportionate number of them who don't even vote in local elections.
Ooh,
And so it's like, and I guess you could do that. I'm not going to get into that here if you wanted to. There's some ways to play with that data. Anyway, I don't want to go off in that terrain. But maybe some people have done it. And maybe I know some people have done it. I don't know. I'm just saying.
I'm going to say this: as our two organizations grow, we should commission and publish a study.
We
How
should.
powerful would that be, dude?
That would be awesome because I can tell you, I firmly believe this, and I'm not going to put you on the spot because I know you got to deal with customers and public facing, but that's what I believe, Sam. I believe that many of the polluters, the pollution in social media, the dreck, the cancer, the dumpster fire that is social media is mainly comprised of people who are low IQ, truly not engaged in the process. They think being engaged is being on a keyboard while they're watching TV or something, and I'm just sick of it.
I agree with you. And I would add one other thing. I think that there's actually two flavors. There's those folks, which I think are probably a larger majority, but there's also people, and I think there's I think in many instances, maybe mental illness, like people who become obsessed with a thing like almost OCD about local government. And
Yeah,
I've
true.
seen this prototype where like they attend every council meeting, they've read every briefing, they know everything. They care about it more than the city manager, the elected officials. They spend all their life, they've literally lasered in on this thing, and it's their life. And you'll find those people. I feel for those people because look, I'm passionate about local government, but even as an elected official and now somebody who works in the space, I don't even spend that much time. I've got family, I've got movies I love, I've got entertainment, I do scroll social. Like, it's sad when people make this their emphasis. And I think for a lot of those types of keyboard warriors, there's something that's a little off that's sort of driving a compulsion to engage in this way. But again, in either instance, this is, to your point, this is not representative of the actual residents who vote and live and pay taxes in these communities. These are anomalies, not the sort of, this is
The
not
norm or the silent majority,
yeah,
right?
it's not
Yeah.
the majority. It's just isn't. And so like using tools like survey work and understanding that these things flash up and go away, and recognizing that, like, put a list of those 20 people on the wall and be like, yeah, we know their perspective. We've done a survey. We know they're wrong, and we're not going to deal with them anymore. Like,
Yeah.
we'll be polite to them. They're residents. They are.
Stop feeding the fire, right?
But
Stop fueling the
yeah,
fire.
and look, I think electeds are open to that conversation. I've had that conversation directly with electives in the capacity in my role, and this is the one thing I love about consulting, especially short-term consulting. I will go in, I will tell it to them straight. Like, if you as a city manager hire me, I'm going to tell your elected officials, I'm like, I can turn your social media around by giving you the tools, but you can screw this up if you choose to do that. Like, you can have this work and be great, or you can screw it up. And I'm saying that as an elected official. And I'm saying that as the former head of Bleacher Report, Vimeo, MGM's Digital, and working with the Beast crew on a cool ass YouTube channel. You can listen to me or you don't. And let me tell you, electeds tend to, especially because I've sat in the seat, they tend to hear it, and that's very gratifying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I can understand why that would be so too, for sure. Well, Sam, I don't know. I might need to wrap up this conversation. I'm starting to get a little heated. I don't know. You brought out the
Oh,
social media fire in me. It's always been a little pet peeve of mine, especially working in some small town communities where I had some knuckleheads spouting off at me. And you can't always fight fire with fire. You just have to sit there and take it, which is the bane of our existence as
we've all
city
been there.
managers, right?
We've all been there,
So
my friend.
you've been amazing on this episode. I've really enjoyed this 2-part series talking about social media. This has been something that a lot of folks have been clamoring for me to cover for quite some time, and I hope I gave it the appropriate attention. And I hope the folks who are listening learn something from it, from you, from me. Why don't we go ahead and wrap this up and give folks an opportunity to learn how they can connect with you and how they want to get in touch with you in the future, and then we'll call it a day.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Joe, so much. I want to pitch you something because we haven't talked about this,
Hit
but I'm
me.
so appreciative. We just made this natural connection on LinkedIn and, found each other to do this. I'd love to offer something to your members or to your listeners, a discount on the program if they mention the show. Would that be cool? Like if
Oh,
people reach
absolutely,
out?
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, and just to be clear, folks who are listening right now, this is just an organic conversation we're having, and
Yep.
if you want to work with Sam Toles and his firm, that's all between you guys. So
100% up to you. I'm so uncomfortable selling it. It's like embarrassing.
yeah, go ahead.
But in any case, so if you want to learn more about what I do and what Civi Social does, easiest way to do that is the website www.civisocial.com. That's CIVISOCIAL.com. I'm Sam at civisocial.com, and would be happy to talk to anybody. I don't bite and I don't charge for free advice. So feel free
Awesome.
to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah. If you're listening to the program, and you decide to work with Sam and his company, please let him know that you heard it through the podcast. I just love to get that positive feedback. And, I live to provide value to the city management community, and I hope I'm doing that. And I think we did that today. I talk about nothing but bangers all the time on this podcast, Sam. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And I think this series qualifies as a nothing but banger episode. I think this
I
is some great content.
I've loved your podcast. I've been listening now for several weeks, and every episode's a banger. I enjoy them.
Thank
I,
you, bud.
I love it, man. Thank you for having me. Maybe we can chat again at some time, but I'm sure we'll be talking on LinkedIn, and I really appreciate the time.
Absolutely love it. Thank you for being on the show. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. I am also the founder and president of the American Association of Municipal Executives. So if you want to be a part of this organization that's reimagining how professional associations should operate for public sector executives, sign up today at aame.org. We're doing something exciting. We're building a community for city managers. It's really special, and I think you're really going to like it. So check it out, and catch you next week on the next episode.